Hi class, this is Professor Quigley here, and I am here to help you get through the final challenge activity for week 4, and that is 4.14. This question is going to be a little difficult, and that's because it's going to challenge you and make you recall everything that you've learned since the start of class. You're going to be declaring variables, giving them a name, giving them a data type. You're going to be setting some values and assigning them to that variable. You're going to be making an if statement, so you're going to be doing what you learned last week with your decisions and loops. And then this week, you're actually going to put everything into a while loop. So everything that you've learned is going to be on display here in this activity. As difficult as it is, I promise we'll get through it together. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So I'm going to go ahead and click Start. Now this problem here, what it's asking us to do is to accept different numbers that a user can type in. So that's where the loop comes in, because we don't know how many different numbers that the user is going to type in. So we're just going to keep looping over and over and over until the user gives us a negative number. So for example here, they give us 15, they give us 20, they could even give us 0, they give us 5, but then as soon as they give us -1, that's the user of the application saying they're done. So we'll write a loop that just says go over and over and over, take everything they type in, and then stop whenever they give us a negative number. The other thing we're supposed to do here is we're supposed to output the average of all the positive numbers that they passed in, and then we're also going to output what the maximum, what the biggest integer was that they passed in as well. And we're just going to output it real simple. It's just going to be average space and then whatever the max value is. So if you were to take these numbers here, the average of those is 10, and what the highest number was passed in was 20. So let's go ahead and work on that together. So I'm going to follow along with the pseudocode document. You could do the same, or you could pause this video as you go through it. The first thing we need to do is declare 4 integers. So hopefully I'll spell it correctly this time. And not find out at the end of the video. So I'm going to copy that, paste, 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 because I know there's 4 of them there. So the first one is going to be user int. This is going to be the variable that when the user types something in, we're going to store it in this variable so that we can evaluate it. And then we'll hit down here. The next one is going to be the sum ints. So this is where we say whatever it was that they passed in, we're going to add it to sum ints. And then when we go through that next iteration through that loop, we're going to take whatever value we had in sum ints from before, and we're going to add to it what we stored from that user into that user int variable. Another variable we're going to need is the number ints. So every time we go through this loop, we're going to add a 1 to this variable because we want to know how many different numbers do we have. We have to know that in order to do the average, because to output the average, we have to take the sum of all the numbers divided by the amount of numbers that we actually have. The last thing is there's a requirement to output what the highest number was that was passed in. So we're going to call that max int. Now, the next thing we have to do when we're doing counting and we're going through loops is we have to make sure we start counting from 0. If we had a program that counted to 5 and then the user went to run that program a second time, we don't want to start counting from where they left off at 5. So it's best practice to always take our variables here and make sure they always start off at 0. So I'm going to take sum ints, we'll make sure that starts off at 0. We're going to take number of ints, make sure that starts off at 0. We'll do max int. In this, we're actually going to have this one start off at -1. You might be asking why I didn't start off at 0. Is because we're only accepting positive numbers. So we can always assume that if we don't get any positive numbers, -1 is probably going to be the highest one. But more on that to come. Let's just get into it here. If we look over here at the pseudocode, we realize declaring numbers is actually kind of easy. We can assign values, using the get statements here. And actually, I just realized I'm on the wrong one. So this is 4-14. I need to scroll down here to 4-14. Boom, here we go. So these are those 4 integers that I was talking about that we had to declare. And then here's where it tells us to set those starting values here. So we understand all this. This is the part that we might be a little confused on. So I'm going to skip that for now, and I'm going to go right to the output statements. So this way we could kind of have everything written that we know, and then we could just focus on the hard part last. So now that we have all these variables declared, we fill them up. Our output statements are going to be put sum ints divided by number ints to output. Because that's how we get the average, right? It's the sum of all the numbers divided by the amount of numbers we have. Then up here, because it wants a space in between the number, we're going to say put output, because that's how we put a space. And the last thing is put max int to output, because it wants the maximum number. So everything we're going to do now is going to happen right here. So I'm going to put some space in here. And now I'm going to focus on this logic right here. So the first thing we need to do is assign a value to user int using the get statement. So all that means, like I said earlier, we're going to take whatever the user types in, and we're going to hold it into user int. So I'm going to say user int equals get next input. Now, this is where our while loop comes in. So we'll say while user int is greater than or equal to 0. This is our Boolean expression of this loop. Whatever I'm about to write next is going to keep happening over and over and over as long as the user int, basically what they typed in, is going to be greater or equal to 0. That's how we can satisfy the requirement that we're only taking positive numbers. If the number is greater or equal to 0, it is positive. So in that loop, we do our indentions 1, 2, 3 spaces over. So the first thing we want to do is we want to take our sum ints equals sum ints plus user int. Sum ints started with 0, so this is going to be, this variable is going to equal 0 plus whatever it is they typed in. Let's just say they typed in 5. Now, we're going to say 0 plus 5 is going to be 5, and we're going to store that in sum ints. When this loop loops back around and it starts over for a second time, sum ints is going to equal to 5. So then it's going to be 5 equals whatever the new value is they typed in, and then store that new value into sum ints. That's the way you can quickly have one variable and then inside a loop keep adding and adding to it, so that way you can get a total. That's how we'll get our sum ints down here. Now we just need to figure out how to get the num ints. That's actually going to be kind of simple. So we'll say num ints equals whatever it is plus 1. We don't care what the user's typing in, because all we're doing is counting how many times we've received something. So every time this loop runs, we'll just take the value of whatever it is. So the first time around it's going to be 0. 0 plus 1 will equal 1, so we'll store that back over here. And when the loop backs around, this will equal 1, so this will be 1 plus 1, that'll be 2, and so we'll store 2 in here. So you can kind of see how that's going. So that's pretty simple. The next thing is where we get to our first if statement. Because what we need to do for the final piece of our puzzle is to be able to tell what is the max number that the user typed in. And you'll remember now we've done this a couple different times on various different problems. So what we'll do here is we'll say if user int, which is the variable that they typed in, is greater than max int, which is our starting value over here of -1. So if that is true, I go to a new line 3 spaces over. So if what the user typed in is greater than what we have stored in this variable here, we're going to say that variable I want it to now equal what the user typed in. Now I go back 3 spaces. I make sure I'm following this indentation because this means everything's going to happen underneath this loop. The last thing we want to do on this loop is get another user input. Get next input. The reason why is because we have to get another user input again to see if we're going to keep going. Because right here, we're outside of the loop when we say, hey, just give me a variable to start with. So they give us a variable, we start with it, and then we're going to check to see if it's greater than 0. They might have given us a -1 as the first number. So then we don't do anything with it because we never entered a loop because they never really gave us a positive number. So if they give us a positive number, we're going to count, keep a total of what it is. We're going to count the number of times that we're looping through to be able to tell how many different numbers they've given us. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, that number you just given us, is it greater than what we already have deemed to be the maximum input? And if it is, then let's update what we're saying the maximum input is, so that way we can have that whenever it's time to output all this stuff to the screen. Finally, let's go over here, get a new user input. So now if the user types in 5, since we've hit the last line of this loop here, it's going to go back up here and it's going to check. And like I said, say if the user typed in 5, it's going to say, okay, is 5 greater than or equal to 0? Yes, it's going to keep going. But if we get down here and the user types in -1, it'll loop back up here and it's going to say, is user int greater or equal to 0? And the answer will be no. And that's when it's going to jump down here and go to our outputs. So let's go ahead and run this and check to see if I have any typos. I believe I have all the logic correct, so I'm going to hit check. Boom, no typos. So for those of you that were following along, everything was typed correctly and it just works. Congratulations, if you managed to get through this problem, you owe yourself a huge pat on the back, because this, you are definitely the minority. There are not a lot of people on this planet that know how to computer program. And you essentially now have demonstrated sequence, decision, which is, or branching, whatever Zybooks calls it, and then loops. The fact that you're able to put these things together shows that you're going to be well on your career path. But pat yourself on your back. Good job. I will see you in week 5. Take care.